On May 16, 1986, a madman with a bomb forced his way into an elementary school and he demanded a huge ransom, promising that he would kill everyone if he wasn't paid. But then, right smack dab in the middle of all of this chaos, dozens of witnesses claimed that they saw these mysterious yet familiar beings somehow float into the room through the ceiling. Many people believe that there are these indescribable beings out there living in another realm, and at just the right times, for whatever reasons, they get involved in our lives. For some, they just work in the shadows, never really showing themselves, and no one really ever knows that they were there. For others, they give inspiration that most people just claim as their own. But for a few, these beings get so directly and so profoundly involved that there's no denying they exist. We hear about these stories all of the time, but usually just dismiss them because they don't happen to us. Like this one from Donna Ferguson. It was Monday afternoon, June 15th, 1998, when it happened. Donna was in the hospital. She had just given birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl named Jessica. Family and friends were there, and among them was her partner Gary and a good friend named Shirley. Well, at some point, while they were all making goo-goo eyes at the baby, Donna started to feel overly tired. But this wasn't her first birth, so she thought she would just power through it and rest after everyone left. But the nurse thought otherwise. She felt that Donna looked a little peaky and had had enough excitement for the day. So she asked everyone to leave, took little baby Jessica to the nursery, and then told Donna to get some rest.
By the time Gary and Shirley left, I could barely stay awake.
Donna fell asleep fast. Well, she more or less passed out. Then, around 2 a.m, she heard this very real, audible voice.
Wake up, wake up, I kept saying softly. I didn't want to and tried desperately to ignore it, telling myself, I can't wake up. I'm so tired. I need to sleep.
But the voice, which remained at the same pitch and the same tone, was persistent. It was determined to wake her up. Like the annoying alarm clock, she couldn't ignore it. And as she was struggling to wake up, it gave her another instruction.
It told me to press the alarm. I didn't even know there was an alarm. Still, I couldn't open my eyes, but I managed to find enough strength to lift my arm. Feeling a wire hanging next to me, I pressed the button.
A moment later, the lights were on and Donna found herself surrounded by a slew of people who were all telling her to stay awake. Donna also discovered that she was completely soaking wet, and later she found out that she had been lying in a pool of her own blood. Well, the next thing that she remembered was waking up back in her room several hours later. For some reason, a large part of her placenta had been left in her uterus, and her body had been aggressively pumping out blood, trying to get rid of it. Well, the surgical team removed it, and then they had to give her a blood transfusion to keep her from dying. The next morning, the doctor came to see her, and he told her that she was extremely lucky. He actually said that he had never seen anyone looking so gray and so unwell who was still alive.
I told the doctor that someone had woken me, and he said that it must have been my guardian angel, because if I'd lost much more blood, I wouldn't have survived.
Donna is convinced that some higher intelligence, one that she calls her guardian angel, must have come into her room that night and been the voice that caused her to press that emergency button. In this video, we're going to consider the possibility that there really are otherworldly beings out there who have our best interest in mind. And to do this, we're going to be focusing on a deranged madman and his diabolical plan to kill over 100 children. First, we'll share a little about the students that found themselves as his hostages. And then we'll give you a brief history on this guy himself. Some people say that his genius somehow corrupted his brain. Then we'll take you through the planning and the execution of his horrific plan, using his own journal notes and police records. And finally, we'll share how several witnesses swore that they saw mysterious beings come through the ceiling of the school just moments before the bomb went off. Then stay with us for our Fact or Fiction segment. There, I'm going to share my thoughts on this case. And then Amy is going to come on, and this time, instead of sharing some additional information about the case, she's actually going to be sharing a story of her own when she was visited and comforted by another worldly being. So, this story begins in the small town of Cokeville. YouTube's policies state that any video showing raw footage of violent events is not eligible for monetization. Since this video contains footage of a bombed classroom, all commercials will feature Damon and Amy as the advertisers. One would be hard-pressed to find a town more close-knit than Cokeville. Located in the Mountain West subregion of the western United States, Cokeville, Wyoming is one of those small towns where everyone knows just about everyone else, and in this case, in a good way. And back in 1986, it was pretty much the same, with a tiny population of right around 500. And a full quarter of the population were of elementary school age, and they were at school that day. Like 7-year-old Katie Walker. She lived with her family just blocks away. She had 2 brothers and a sister. Sadly, her sister Rachel and one of her brothers, Travis, were at the school and among the victims when it happened. And both of her parents, Kevin and Glenna, were EMTs who, not knowing if their children had lived or died, had to be strong as they were part of the rescue team. Not far from the Walkers lived Nathan Hartley. He was the youngest of 4 children, and he too was there when the bomb went off. His mother was a stay-at-home mom who gave all of her time and attention to the family. But his father, well, he worked as a sheriff's deputy, and unfortunately, he would be the one who would have to sift through the aftermath from the explosion that his son was in. As a matter of fact, there were 135 students there that day, and even if their parents weren't EMTs or in law enforcement, most of them had raced to the school and had gotten there right after it had happened and had to act with hearts in their chest as first responders, not knowing if their children had lived or died. When Amy was sharing this part with me, my mind raced. You know, we do a wide range of reports on possible paranormal events, but I don't think that we've ever done one like this before. And I kept thinking, what type of a person could walk into a school with a bomb intending on blowing up children in order to get his way? Images of Manson and Hitler and Satan all ran through my mind. And then she showed me his picture. Enter David Gary Young, your typical, decent-looking, unassuming bad guy. David Gary Young was born on June 12, 1943 in Albany, California, but he wasn't named until a bit later when he was adopted by Howard and Eva Young. He had an older brother, Harvey, and a younger sister, Janet, and shortly after he was born, the family moved to Iowa, which, if you watch this channel on a regular basis, you know that that's where Amy grew up.
David grew up in Grinnell, Iowa. Even as a child, he liked guns, but I never knew him to be violent. He didn't associate with other children. He was different. He didn't follow the path, and the world was kind of mixed up to him.
He got straight A's in school, even in the tougher classes. In psychology, criminology, everything was straight A's.
David left Iowa when he was 28, and he wandered around the country for a bit, living in Nebraska, Idaho, Texas, Wyoming, Oklahoma. Well, finally he ended up in Tucson, Arizona. But interestingly, along with other jobs in between, he actually worked in law enforcement in several states as he moved from one to another. He even worked in Cokeville as the marshal for a bit in 1977, but he was let go after just 6 months.
David was fired because he cared more about dressing up like Wyatt Earp with a show of guns than in actually enforcing the law.
All of the research that Amy dug up on this guy suggested that he was highly intelligent, but didn't quite fit in. Several sources said that he was constantly trying to disprove the existence of God using math, which ultimately resulted in his manifesto titled 0 = Infinity. After the bombing, the investigators found that he had been keeping journals for years.
He started writing in the journals when he was 25 or 30, somewhere around there. He was extremely brilliant.
At one point, David took a philosophy course, and it was obvious that he did not agree with the book.
In the margins of the textbook, he had written all of the things that were wrong with it.
Hartley said that although David disagreed with his class, it somehow fundamentally changed his view of reality.
He started believing in reincarnation. Everything from that point on was totally focused at the next world. He called it the BNW. We later discovered that BNW stood for Brave New World.
Reading through David's journals, Hartley surmised that it was right around this time that David started devising a plan that he called the Biggie. In this plan, he would commit suicide, and then he would become the Lord and Master over the next world. Well, in order to do that, he'd of course need people to rule over once he got there. According to David, they would have to be highly intelligent. So, for whatever reason, he zeroed in on the children of Cokeville. Ironically, he believed that by gathering them all together and putting them in a small room and then blowing them to smithereens, he would somehow be saving them from their overly controlling, corrupt teachers. Well, at this point, you may be thinking about my open, remembering how I said that he had demanded a huge ransom, but the investigative team believes that he only did that as a ploy to keep everyone calm. Well, he set his date to execute his biggie on May 16, 1986, but before he did that, of course, well, he'd have to blow up a bus.
Senora, what would you like to drink?
A coffee.
To support our channel, buy us a coffee.
Or become a member.
It was Wednesday, April 30th, 1986, and David was out in the Arizona desert preparing an old abandoned school bus. Along with deadly pieces of shrapnel in his homemade bomb, he also packed it with a powdery compound. Once ignited, this powder would float in the air and it was flammable enough to burn. So, if the shrapnel didn't do the job, this powder would incinerate every cubic inch around ground zero, making it impossible for anyone in that vicinity to survive. This, of course, was just a test on an empty old school bus, but it would tell him if he had designed the right type of explosive or not. Well, he finished his prepping and then ignited the bomb. And then, kaboom! The bus exploded. No one knows if he smiled at his success or not because no one else was there, but with such a twisted mind, it's hard to believe that he didn't. Somewhere along the way, he convinced several poor souls to work with him. Of course, initially, he kept the truth of his plan to himself. He simply told everyone that it was all about a new energy source, and then he would show them how he could make the air burn. He got 3 people to invest money. He got his daughter Princess to kind of be his gopher, and he got his wife Doris to help him organize things. It's thought that his wife probably knew a little more than everyone else. Doris and Princess drove to Cokeville on Monday, May 12, 1986, in order to scope out the town. They did this, however, under the guise that they were visiting Doris's daughter. Then, over the next couple of days, the 3 investors were rounded up and David put them up at the Lazy T Motel in Cokeville. Then, on the 14th, David called a meeting where he handed everyone a copy of this. It's 0 equals infinity, and it's basically his proof that mankind is nothing more than a social construct, and that everything that humans believe in has been taught, and that real truth isn't something that one can learn, but rather it just is. In this paper, he talks about a lot of things, but he sets his premise with Socrates, referring to him as being reputedly the wisest man of his time. And he quotes Socrates as saying, "As for me, all I know is that I know nothing." And then he goes on to say that this knowledge of nothing is
all we have for all the lessons of history. These 2,400 plus years, Christ, revolutions, insurance, relativity, moon and space probes, crusades and inquisitions, Shakespeare, Newton, medical science, hydrogen, fusion, metallurgy, Hitler, electricity, government and law, etc. The answer to this concern regarding the nothingness of knowledge is rather yes or no. The knowledge of nothing is all there is to know, but 99.9% of us don't even know that.
At the end of this meeting, one of the investors demanded to know, what in the world are we investing in? Why are we in Cokeville? And what in the world is the plan? And David told him to stop asking questions and just trust him, to which the investor said, all right, well, enough is enough. I'm done with you. And he left. Later that evening, David had his daughter paint the windows of the van white so that no one could see inside. Then he went into the bathroom and assembled the bomb. The next day, David and his daughter woke up before sunrise and loaded the van with weapons, wires, canned food, and other supplies. Then, right around 6 a.m., they mailed a copy of his Zero Equals Infinity manifesto to the then President Ronald Reagan and to several news agencies. Later that afternoon, everyone was taken to the Best Western Motel, and then they all waited for tomorrow. On the morning of May 16, 1986, they all checked out of the motel, put their luggage into David's Subaru, and then headed to Cokeville in the rented van. Now, get this. Along the way, they stopped several times for smiley, touristy type group photos. It kind of gives you chills when you think about where they're headed, doesn't it? Well, they got to Cokeville right around 11 a.m., and I wish that I could tell you that some mysterious force stopped them from taking over the school that day, or an angelic being came down and kept that bomb from going off. But I can't. However, what did happen? Well, that was much more of a miracle than that.
Oh my gosh, look what I just got.
Is that rope merch?
Yes, it is.
Get your rope merchandise today at Fourth Wall. When they pulled up to Cokeville, David finally stopped the van and told everyone where they were headed. He told them that the plan was to kidnap the children and then demand a ransom, which of course was only half the truth. David knew that if he told them the real plan, well, they'd think he was crazy and then they'd back out. But to their credit, they backed out anyway. That is, all of them except for Doris. So David tossed her a handgun, cuffed the two investors to the frame of the van in the back seat, and he put Princess in between him and Doris, and then Doris drove. When they pulled up to the school, several children were outside, and this, of course, wasn't good for David's plan. If he walked up with guns and a bomb, well, everyone would just run away. So they drove to a secluded area on the east side of Cokeville, and they waited. A couple of hours later, he drove back, but he found that there were children outside then as well. So he backed out of the parking lot, and then he drove to a secluded area on the west side of Cokeville, and he waited. Then, about a half an hour later, he tried it again, and he found the same thing. So, getting a bit frustrated, he drove the van to a hill in the distance where he could watch the school through binoculars. But by the time that he got there and he looked back, well, all the children had gone inside. So he raced back and he parked the van at the south entrance. He had Princess unload everything, and then he tossed her the keys and he told her to, quote, get the hell out of there. Then he took some firearms and the bomb in a half-sized shopping cart to the school office. At the same time, Doris went from room to room telling everyone that there was something special waiting for them in room 4. Now, that's diabolical. Well, David got the office staff, and eventually everyone ended up in room 4. There were 21 adults, that's including David and Doris, and 135 children. Along with being terrified, everyone was of course crowded. The room was only about 30 by 30, making it an extremely tight fit. And to make matters worse, David had made this homemade dead man's switch, and it was wrapped around his wrist. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a very sensitive mechanism that's intended to ignite the bomb should there be too much movement. The idea, of course, is that if someone killed David, his hand would drop and then the bomb would go off, killing everyone. So at this point, if someone even accidentally bumped David, the bomb might go off. In order to keep this from happening, David instructed the teachers to tape the floor in a square around him, and then he told everyone to stay out of that square, which made everyone, of course, feel even more crowded. At this point, it was time for the final phase of David's plan. All he had to do now was ignite the bomb, but he hesitated. No one really knows what he was waiting for, maybe just to get up the nerve. But the minutes ticked by, and then an hour passed, and David just sat there quietly in the middle of the room. Then at one point, he told Doris that he had to use the restroom, and he removed that dead man's switch from his own wrist, and he made her wear it, and then he left the room. While he was gone, everyone breathed a sigh of relief, including the children, and their voices started to rise. Well, not wanting any trouble, one of the teachers, a lady named Miss Jean Mitchell, told all of the children that it was quiet time, and they all needed to be quiet. And then, now check this out. She turned to Doris and she said, "I've got a headache." To which Doris replied, "Me too." But that was the wrist that the dead man's switch was tied to. And at that very moment, the moment that she touched her head, the bomb went off.
Hey, honey, check this out.
That's my line. Get your mug today at Fourth Wall. David was in the restroom when the explosion rocked the building. It was loud and powerful, and he immediately rushed out, expecting, of course, to find everyone dead. Instead, it was chaos. No one was dead. No one was even close to death. Well, with the exception of Doris. She was on fire. With her screaming, it looked like something out of a horror movie. Well, David took a couple of pot shots at some random adults, and then he walked up to Doris and he shot her in the head. Probably to put her out of her misery, but maybe because she had blundered his great plan. In any case, he took another look around the room and he just couldn't believe what he was seeing. How was everyone still alive? It made no sense. So, with his plan foiled, he walked back to the restroom and then he shot himself. Although some of the people in the room that day did sustain a handful of injuries, only one was even remotely life-threatening, and David and Doris were the only two fatalities. That in itself, at least to me, would have made this thing a miracle, and the story has been dubbed the Cokeville Miracle. But it gets better. Explosives expert Richard Haskell from Rock Springs, Wyoming, was put in charge. Between military and law enforcement, he had had several years of experience with bombs, and he was very familiar with the type of bomb that David had designed. As he dismantled it, trying to figure out why it hadn't killed everyone, he discovered that two of the more critical blasting cap wires that would have dispersed shrapnel had been cut, seemingly with something like scissors. So that dampened that part of the detonation. He also found that there had been a gasoline leak. And do you remember that flammable powder that was supposed to float and then incinerate every cubic inch of air around ground zero? Well, it got so liquefied with gasoline dripping on it that it never got off of its plate. It just laid there, muddied. But even these two things together, the snipped wires and the muddied powder, didn't explain why the other parts of this explosion didn't kill everyone. The explosion was still huge. Finally, having no better explanation, Haskell said that the whole thing was just one big miracle. And as you can imagine, the press had a heyday with that one, and they confronted him on it, and they asked him, "Did you really mean to use the word miracle?"
Labeling it a miracle is the understatement of the century. It just didn't go off the way it was supposed to. There should have been a horrendous explosion. I'm not a religious man, but what you've got here is a miracle. There's no doubt in my mind that there was divine intervention.
As I said, even though the bomb didn't go off the way that it should have, it did go off. And as you can see in this video, it was a powerful explosion. Not only did it go off, but many of the shrapnel pieces that hadn't ignited because those two cut wires just randomly started exploding after the fact, sending shrapnel through the air while everyone was still trying to get out of the room. It was as if a handgun were being shot in every direction, but miraculously, somehow, it missed nearly everyone that was there. Well, the bomb expert couldn't explain how that was possible, but the children could. Hey, honey, what do you have?
A coffee.
A coffee?
Yeah.
To support our channel, buy us a coffee.
Or become a member.
The moment the bomb had exploded, the school faculty jumped into action, making them nothing less than children-saving heroes. While these explosions of shrapnel were still randomly flying through the air, these teachers were working together to get these children out the windows and out the doors and into safety. Well, everyone was examined and treated, but most of their injuries were so minor that they were home that very night, and any of the victims that did go to the hospital weren't there long. This, of course, became national news, and everyone marveled at the foiled attempt of a madman. But then, the children started talking about mysterious beings that showed up and saved everyone. And not in some figurative, vague way either. They spoke of them as if they had really been there. Do you remember little Katie Walker? Well, just minutes after running from the explosion, she told her 14-year-old brother Shane that, quote, "They saved us." And then a few moments later, when she saw her mother, Glenna Walker, she repeated what she told her brother. She said, "They saved us." When her mother asked who, she said, "The angels," to which her mother thought, well, she's speaking religiously, figuratively. So she patted her daughter on the head and she said, "Yes, we all have much to be grateful for today." But later, it became abundantly clear that Katie wasn't speaking figuratively.
They came through the ceiling and they were floating. They were all dressed in white, like a light bulb, but brighter around the face. They were standing there above us. There was a mother and a father, and a lady holding a tiny baby, and a little girl with long hair. It was a family of people. The woman told us the bomb was going off soon and to listen to our brother Travis. He was going to come over and tell us what to do.
When Amy shared this part with me, I thought that it was extremely strange that powerful, mysterious entities like this had families. But there was a reason for this, and it gets pretty interesting. Katie's sister Rachel added to Katie's experience.
The lady said to be sure we did what he told us.
So they asked Travis what he saw.
"I didn't see anything. Nothing. I just heard a voice. It told me to find my little sisters and take them over by the window and keep them there. I did what I was told. I looked around and found them and told them to follow me over by the window."
Shortly after Travis got them over to the windows is when the bomb went off, and that of course made it a lot easier to get them out of the room. Because the girls had described these angels as resembling a family, one of the adults had the idea to show the children photos of loved ones who had passed, to see if, well, maybe these angels were somehow deceased relatives. So they showed several photos to the girls at different times, and strangely, they both pointed to the same lady and they said that she was one of the angels. The lady that they pointed to was a woman named Shirley Ruth Thornock, which was Glenna's mother, who had died when Glenna was just 15 years old, years before the girls were even born. They pointed out other family members as well. But here's the interesting part. Out of all of the photos that they were shown, and they were shown quite a few, they both identified the same deceased loved ones as being among the people who were part of this group of angels. And it wasn't just the Walkers either. Do you remember little Nathan Hartley?
Just before the bomb went off, angels came down from the ceiling. They were bright like light bulbs. There were about 10 of them, holding hands around the children. One of the angels told me the bomb was going to go off very soon. She told me how to save myself. She said to go over by the window, then hurry out when I heard the bomb explode. She told me that I would make it if I did exactly what she said.
Later, Nathan was also shown photos of deceased relatives, and when he was shown a photo of his great-grandmother Flossie, he immediately perked up and he said that that was his angel. Flossie was born in the late 1800s, and she passed when Nathan was just 3 years old. There were others as well. As a matter of fact, Amy gave me a whole list of children who independently came forward and said that they were protected by angels. In the interest of time, let me just share one more. Jenny Johnson didn't just see these angels. She actually touched one.
After the bomb went off, I thought one of the teachers at the school was helping me. I didn't recognize her, but she led me out by the hand and told me not to go back.
Later in the 5th grade, Jenny was glancing through a family photo album when she recognized the teacher who had saved her. It was her deceased aunt who had passed away several years prior to the Cokeville miracle.
You've been on your phone all night. What are you doing?
Nothing.
Let me see that. What? Buy me a coffee.
To support our channel, buy us a coffee.
Or become a member.
First, let me say that this is not a religious channel. We're not sharing this information to convert anybody to any type of religion. We share mysteries, everything from alien abductions to time travel. So with that being said, did angels really show up and save the children and faculty of Cokeville Elementary on May 16, 1986? Well, I'm sure you can guess what the skeptics think about this. It is interesting, though, how the children all called them angels, but then pointed out family members that had been deceased and that they didn't know. Amy did some digging on this, and some people think that maybe the children were asked leading questions, and these thoughts were planted into their minds. Maybe. But then again, that's a boatload of children to brainwash. And all of these children grew up, and now, as far as we know, there's no conclusive evidence that any of them have ever went back on their statements. And let's just take the children out of it for a second. How come no one but the perpetrators were killed that day? As I was assembling the information for this report, my thoughts kept going back to Richard Haskell. Remember him? He was the bomb expert. And he concluded that the whole thing had to be some type of a miracle. Now, here's something crazy. When I was puzzling through my thoughts, the fact or fiction section, what I was going to say, I actually thought of the movie Contact. Do you remember the scene where Ellie was meeting the aliens for the first time? And to make it easier on her understanding, they appeared to her as her deceased father? Well, could something like that have happened here? Believe it or not, Amy had an experience like this when she was young.
Inspirational.
Let's don't share that with everybody else.
I think it's great.
So normally you come on and you give us like extra information about the report.
Mm-hmm.
But this time it's going to be a little bit different. And I'm excited because I've heard the story before. But every time that you share the story, it gives me chills and it's pretty intense. And it really happened to you.
Yes.
So without further ado, why don't you tell all of us and tell me again what happened?
Okay, well, I grew up in Iowa. You know, it was maybe what you would consider an idyllic childhood, right? Very small town. Everybody knew everybody. And my sister was quite a bit older than me. I've got 2 older sisters and 2 older brothers. And from an early age, my sister had like rheumatoid arthritis, some complications to that, right? So she was in and out of the hospital, as you know, I recall, but it was always in and out of the hospital. You know, it was nothing earth-shattering, it didn't seem, you know, to me. Well, when I was in 6th grade, it was another one of those, you know, couple of days where Judy was in the hospital. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night, like I literally sat straight up, fully aware in my bed. And I looked up and there's this, I don't know what else to call it, but this like flowing light, like the top half of it looked human form, but it was just all light. And my sister's voice, I totally recognized my sister's voice, said, "Everything is going to be okay." And I remember just like, whoa. And I laid back down and went to sleep. Like, I feel like now that I look back on it, that's really weird. Like, why wouldn't have I gone and said, I just saw something amazing? But I went back to sleep. Well, I remember I woke up hearing my father crying. Now, my father was a very strong man, and so hearing him cry was extremely rare. And I remember thinking, Dad's hurt. And I go to run into my mom and dad's bedroom, and my mom, you know, stops me right away, takes me out in the hall and says, "Your sister died last night." Sorry.
It's okay. I'm sorry.
That part always gets me. So I was like, what? And in my brain, I thought, No, she just talked to me. She just talked to me. No, she's not. Anyway, so I didn't tell my parents then. My immediate thought was, my dad is hurting. My dad is hurting. So all my energy went into like trying to help my dad and be there for my dad. And, we went through the funeral and everything, and I did not tell anybody, but there was something in the way she said, everything is going to be all right. I personally feel it helped me be strong, for my dad. Sorry.
Yes.
Anyway, so I know what I saw.
Yeah.
And I don't believe it was a dream. I know some people are like, it was just a dream. It wasn't just a dream. I wasn't anticipating that she was going to die, that she'd been in and out of the hospital. That wasn't what it was. And I had no idea that she passed away until I woke up in the morning to the sound of my dad crying.
Yeah.
So
that's intense.
it was completely intense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love you.
I love you too.
So I got to ask you, like I always do, what do you think about this one? Do you think that the children really saw? Do you think there was a miracle?
So our audience doesn't know this, but when I came to tell you this story, I was bawling. I was like, and of course you're amazing. You're like, oh my gosh, what is it? What is it? And I'm like, this story. And then of course it brought up what happened with my sister and everything. But I was so touched as I read some of the witness testimony. So I believe something happened. I know I use that phrase too much, but I do believe something happened. I believe those children saw something. One of the children talked about almost these beings of light surrounding like the bomb, almost containing the bomb. And to me, that was beautiful. That it's like, wow. So even if there was no apparition, right? Well, then he still, sorry, I'm getting choked up again, but he still believes that happened. He believes they were protected. Something happened. There were some sort of, I don't know if you want to call them angels, ancestors, spirits, whatever, but I believe something came to that spot in Cokeville.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. So thank you again.
You're welcome.
Miracles. Only the people involved really know what happened that day. And I know a lot of people who don't believe at all in miracles. But personally, I do. And I think that it would be a pretty dismal place if everybody stopped believing in miracles. This report reminds me of what happened to Jenny Cokeville, not because she experienced a miracle, but rather because she experienced something spiritual that she couldn't quite explain. Actually, it's been a lifelong experience for her, and I think that she's still going through it now. When she was just 3 years old, she began having these dreams. In the dreams, she was an adult woman who was married with children. Well, the dreams stayed with her, and as she grew up, she began to believe that she had lived a previous life before she was born as Jenny. And then finally, using the information from her dreams, she started looking into the real world for anything that might match up to what she eventually called her past life memories. During her investigation, she met up with some people who, now, check this out, they remembered her as their mother who had died decades earlier. It's a pretty intense story. We did a complete report on it. And if you'd like to see it, it's here.
It is hot in here.
It is.
I don't know how you do it for hours and hours and hours.
Well, I think most of the other end screens were outside, but this time I put us in a cave. That's why I saw it.